There we go. Welcome everybody to Satsang. It's a beautiful day here, sort of. We're getting intermittent weather, so that's cool. And appreciate everybody jumping on. I think it's going to be a good one. Going to be a good one tonight. This is actually one of my favorite pieces, and I am that. It's chapter 16, and the title is Desirelessness, the Highest Bliss. But I think what's really great about this one is that if you want to kind of track where a lot of seekers, how they move through things, this particular questioner is a great example, and you'll see what I'm after as we go through this. Um,
Mm.
so so he starts out and he says, I've met many realized people, but never a liberated man. He says, have you come across a liberated man, or does liberation mean, among other things, also abandoning the body? And of course, Nisargadatta says, well, what do you mean by realization and liberation? And he says, by realization, I mean a wonderful experience of peace, goodness, and beauty when the world makes sense and there is all-pervading unity of both substance and essence. He says, while such an experience does not last, it cannot be forgotten. So what he's speaking of here is what we would call Satori. Ramesh labeled it a free sample. And we'll circle back to that. He says, it shines in the mind both as memory and longing, and I know what I'm talking about, for I've had such an experience. So a lot of us, as we've gone along the road, we likely have had such an experience. Now, it's always interesting that that experience really doesn't necessarily track a lot of times with where somebody is along the line, and you'll see that by the questioning here. He says, so by liberation, I mean to be permanently in that wonderful state. What I'm asking is whether liberation is compatible with the survival of the body. All right, so notice the concern, the survival of the body. Maharaj, what's wrong with the body? And the questioner says, well, the body's so weak and short-lived, it certainly needs, it creates needs and cravings, and it limits one grievously. I don't know if that's how you say the word, but that's how I'm saying it. Maharaj, so what? He says, let physical expressions be limited, but liberation of the self from its false and self-imposed ideas, it is not contained in some particular experience, however glorious. Questioner, does it last forever? And this is when Maharaj starts to tease out. He goes, all experience is time bound, and whatever has a beginning must have an end. He says, so liberation in my sense of the word does not exist. Maharaj, on the contrary, one is always free. You are both conscious and free to be conscious. Nobody can take this away from you. And here's a really great one. Do you ever know yourself non-existing or unconscious? And this was one that Ramesh used to use a lot. He would say, he said, do you remember yourself at your 5-year-old birthday party? Do you remember yourself at your 25-year-old birthday party? Do you remember yourself at your 55-year-old birthday party, however long you've lived? And he said, do you recognize that you were exactly the same in each of those? Right. And that's what he's talking about here. Has there ever been a time where when the world arose, you weren't with the world? Right. So he says, I may not remember, but that does not disprove my being occasionally unconscious. He says, why not turn away from the experience to the experiencer? Right? That's where he's always going to take you, and realize the full import of the only true statement you can make, I am. Now, it's really interesting. You see, he's had a free sample, but he hasn't gotten to the point where he recognizes that the action isn't in the manifestation, right? But in the experience or the manifestation, in terms of where the process of awakening is going to occur. Now, of course, remember, the experiencer and the experience always come together, right? They're always arising together. I'm not saying that you can split those out, but It's to the experiencer that the inquiry happens or is driven. He said, so how is the I am done? Now, this is why I think this is a really beautiful piece because he's going to walk us through some pieces and they're really great. He said there is just no how here. Just keep in mind the feeling of I am, merge in it till your mind and feeling become one. By repeated attempts, you will stumble on the right balance of attention and affection. All right. Now, notice it's a really interesting thing. He's going to pull into this in a minute, but attention, right? We would all agree with that, right? Attention. In other words, when we're dealing with the I am, attention is there. But notice he includes the term affection. And watch, this one will play out a little bit. And your mind will be firmly established in the thought dash feeling I am. Whatever you think, say, or do in this sense of immutable and affectionate being remains the ever-present background of the mind. Okay, so there you go. That's the ever-present of all that arises, the experiencer and the experience. That's the background. And you call it liberation. Maharaj comes back and says, I call it normal, right? Because think about what happens with the mind. It's always trying to make something special. It wants a category for it. So you call that liberation. He says, no, I call that normal. What is wrong with being, knowing and acting effortlessly and happily? Why consider it so unusual to expect immediate destruction of the body? What is wrong with the body that it should die? Correct your attitude to your body and leave it alone. Don't pamper, don't torture, just keep it going. Most of the time below the threshold of consciousness, right? So remember, a lot of times what we do is we pay attention to the body in a way that actually defines us as a separate entity that's doing something. So what he's pointing out is that the body itself can be lived, as it were, under the radar. It doesn't need to be taken care of. It'll take care of itself to a large degree. It certainly breathes on its own. All of the things that happen naturally happen on their own. He said, he said, the memory of my wonderful experience, remember this man has had a Satori, haunts me. I want them back. Okay. So here's where we start to walk in. Because you want them back, you cannot have them, right? Why is that? Well, the why is that is the wanting or desiring is the activity of the separate me. Okay. So from a standpoint of having had that amazing experience, right? What happens a lot, and this is something to pay attention to if you've gone through this at all, um, the mind gets busy and it starts to say, I want that back. And when that happens, you will know that the free sample has been co-opted by the mind. The mind has said, oh, that's mine, right? When in actuality, the free sample itself was an envelope and the mind was included in it. It wasn't the mind's at all, right? So I noticed Tim wrote a little note. You mind if I speak about your little note that you wrote? Okay. So Tim wrote a little note this week, and what he was kind of talking about was where he was stuck, as it were. I think that's a good way of saying that. And what occurred to me was that this will be a really great thing for him to hear because the likelihood is that Tim was moving along, and at a certain point in time, the mind came in and said, okay, I want that to continue to happen, right? So what happens is the mind has co-opted Tim's experience. And that would be what Maharaj is pointing out here, right? So remember, When the mind is in activity, you're going to always have tension and contraction, right? So a free sample does not arise within that kind of environment, right? So you're always going to know that. And and so what's almost impossible to do, right, is from a mind standpoint, create an experience that is relaxed. The mind does not do complete relaxation. They don't live in the same county. So so just recognize that whenever the feeling of stuckness arises, right, that's the mind co-opting it, creating an environment of tension and contraction and saying, let's go get that. I like that. Let's get some more of that. Right. And it just simply, it's not going to happen. Right. He said, so the state of craving for anything blocks all deeper experience. Nothing of value can happen to a mind which knows exactly what it wants. Right? For nothing the mind can visualize and want is of much value. Right. Again, so what does that mean? Looking in manifestation. If what the mind can create and wants, where does the mind create and want? Always in manifestation. Right. So all of its desires are created out of what it sees out there, and always what it wants is something out there. Right. So that's the piece when he moved and said, let's go to the experiencer. Because when you're talking about the experience, you're talking about stuff that really doesn't matter much in terms of this particular movement, right? So Maharaj says, now here's something I want you to watch. Want the best, the highest happiness, the greatest freedom. Desirelessness is the highest bliss. Now, if you read that, you're going, wait a minute, that's contradictory, isn't it? Because he's saying, want the best, the highest happiness, the greatest freedom. Desirelessness is the highest bliss. But what he's doing is he's planting a story. That's his pointer, so that the mind, in essence, can hold the pointer. And what's going to happen to that pointer later on? It's going to get thrown away. So whenever you see something contradictory, right, we've talked about that before. That just means that you've already likely walked past that pointer and got rid of it, and you're letting it back in your world, and it's causing you some contradiction. Right? There's no contradiction. There's no contradiction there. This is just a stepping stool for this particular questioner to step into a place where he can see that these two things don't exist together. But at least he now has what we call a living understanding, which is what a pointer attempts to be. And it's always placed in a mind approach, right? All stories live in the mind. So any story that we use as a pointer is going to have a dual container, and it's going to live in the mind. It's going to point elsewhere, but that's where it's going to live. And all of that stuff is available for the refuse pile whenever you'd like it. All right. So here he goes on. He says, freedom from desire is not the freedom I want. I want the freedom to fulfill my longings. There we go. So look who's come back onto the scene. He says, you are free to fulfill your longings. As a matter of fact, you are doing nothing else. Right? That's what you're already doing. He says, I try, but there are obstacles that leave me frustrated. Maharaj has overcome them. I cannot. I am weak, he says. What makes you weak? What is weakness? Others fulfill their desires. Why don't you? He says, I must be lacking energy. All right, now track through. What happened to your energy? Where did it go? Did you not scatter it over so many contradictory desires and pursuits? You don't have an infinite supply of energy. Why not? The questioner asks. And Maharaj comes back and says, your aims are small and low, right? They do not call for more. Only God's energy is infinite because he wants nothing for himself. Be like him and all your desires will be fulfilled. Now, what he's in essence is saying is be like him, and you'll notice that there aren't any desires to be fulfilled, but that's okay, right? And you notice in the beginning that he talked about, think about this for a minute, affection. Remember that we use the word affection? He says God's energy is infinite because he wants nothing for himself. That's a definition of affection, right? affection. We always think of affection as affection for something. And what he's talking about is the state of pure affection, right? That's what he's talking about, right? We're familiar with the more meditative term that he used in that sentence, which is just the witnessing or the perceiving, right? But the affection is there as well, right? Be like him and all your desires will be fulfilled because whatever happens is going to be exactly what your desires were if you want to look at it that way. He says, the higher your aims and the vaster your desires, the more energy you will have for their fulfillment, right? Which means the less detail and the less you think about things you want, right? The more likely, or the more more energy you will have. Here we go. Desire the good of all, and the universe will work with you. There's that pure affection showing up again. But if you want to have your own pleasure, you must earn it the hard way. He said, before desiring, deserve, right? So he goes on, and now he's going to explain. This one has a block about, hey, I have to work, and that gets in the way. He says, I'm engaged in the study of philosophy, sociology, and education. I think more mental development is needed before I can dream of self-realization. Am I on the right track? Right. So mind development, we kind of know where this one's going to go. He says to earn a livelihood, some specialized knowledge is needed. General knowledge develops your mind, no doubt. But if you're going to spend your life amassing knowledge, you build a wall around yourself. To go beyond the mind, a well-furnished mind is not needed. Because you're not seduced by the furniture that placed in that well-furnished mind. He said, then what is needed? He says, distrust the mind and go beyond. Right. So now we're right back in. You see what he did? He walked him right through all of it. This man has had a satori, right? But from there, he found himself not very equipped to move from that place, and he's haunted, in fact, he says, because he wants that experience back. He says, what shall I find beyond the mind? And he says, the direct experience of being, knowing, and loving. Now he's talking about a different kind of knowing than when you and I talk about knowledge. We're talking about something different. We'll chat about that in a bit. He said, how does one go beyond the mind? He said, there are many starting points and they all lead to the same goal. He says, you may begin with selfless work, abandoning the fruits of action. You may then give up thinking and end up giving up all desires. Here, giving up is the operational factor. Or you may not bother about anything you want or think or do and just stay put in the thought and feeling I am, focusing on I am firmly in your mind. All kinds of experience may come to you. Remain unmoved in the knowledge that all perceivable is transient and only the I am endures. All right, so that's the part that's living there. Notice how beautiful he is, how he walks into that. Then he says, I cannot give my life to such practice as I have my duties to attend to. All right. All right. Um, he says, well, by all means, attend your duties. Action in which you are not emotionally involved and which is beneficial and does not cause suffering will not bind you. You may be engaged in several directions and work with enormous zest, yet remain inwardly free and quiet with a mirror-like mind, which reflects all without being affected. Right. Now, this is the essence of the work that I've done for, most of my life, because you can imagine I did corporate development and leadership work. So can you imagine how many times I heard that the work was getting in the way of the internal development? Right? That's the standard corporate answer. Hey, you know what? You see this to-do list? Right? I got all this stuff on it's getting in my way. And so the majority of the engagement work that I did with people was to see that no matter what was happening, no matter what they were doing, that the watching and witnessing could occur. And that became 99% of my conversation. Right? Dial in, spend an hour, bring anything you want from your corporate world. And what are we going to do with it? We're going to learn how to watch it. It was that simple. Right? because that's where most folks in the corporate world are. They're just stepping into the witnessing space. So they need somebody who's, you know, credible enough, I guess, which makes me laugh that I would fill that role, but nonetheless, had been in the trenches before, so to speak, right? And could say, "Oh no, you can watch that stuff." Honest, I kid you not. And that was the work, and that's what he's taking. That's what he's taking him through now. And then the question is, such a state realizable? And that's always the question. Wait a minute, I don't think you can do that, right? And he says, I would not talk about it if we're not. Why would I engage in fancies? He goes, well, everybody quotes scriptures. Of course, Maharaj, I love this. Those who know only scriptures know nothing. To know is to be. I know what I am talking about is not from reading or hearsay. He says, I am studying Sanskrit under a professor, but really I am only reading scriptures. I am in search of self-realization, and I came to get the needed guidance. Kindly tell me, what am I to do? Now you've seen he's walked him through a whole bunch here, right? So it's a little like, well, that has been what we're doing. And we're going to talk about that a little later in terms of what wisdom is, right? So so he says, since you have not since you have read the scriptures, he says, why ask me? The questioner, the scriptures show the general directions, but the individual needs personal instructions. Who made that up? All right. He says, here you go. Your own self is your ultimate teacher. All right, the Sadguru. So if you think about it, when you look at a satsang, what satsang is the delivery of that which the inner Sadguru then utilizes as its own, right? All this is a warehouse, right? And every satsang puts its bundle in the warehouse, and there it is. And the beauty of it is the mind is going to go, oh, I need to remember that. Da, da, da. No, remember, we talked about Tim. Tim, don't have to worry about that. Just be here for the delivery, right? And the internal Sadguru, that young man will pick out all the stuff he needs, or a young woman, given whichever side of that fence you live on. But the bottom line is the Sadguru handles it. And what's really great is a lot of times you know you're looking for something, you can't quite find it, you know it's going to be really helpful. And in the not knowing, you make up another version of your own, right? And a week later, it'll read back and you'll read back and you go, wow, that was pretty bright. Well, it wasn't yours to begin with, right? But it's this moment that looks like the human has really got no clue, probably true. And the Sadguru steps in and gives you a new pointer. It's the old pointer repurposed. It's your version of the new pointer. So let those happen. Whenever you can't find that thing you're looking for, that's great. It'll come. Something will come, right? The answer's coming. So he says your own self is the ultimate teacher, right? The outer teacher is merely a milestone. It is only your inner teacher that will walk with you to the goal, for he is the goal. Questioner, the inner teacher is not easily reached. Maharaj, of course, he says, well, since he is in you and with you, the difficulty cannot be serious, right? Look over in the seat next to you. He's riding right with you. Look within and you will find him. He says, when I look within, I find sensations and perceptions, thoughts, feelings, desires and fears, memories and expectations. I'm immersed in this cloud and see nothing else. He jumps on it. That which sees all of this and the nothing too is the inner teacher. He alone is, all else appears to be. He is your own self, Swarupa, your hope and assurance of freedom. Find him and cling to him, and you will be saved and safe. Now, when he says that, once again, pointer, right? How do you cling on to yourself? Right? If you are clinging on to yourself, then the you that's clinging and the you that's being clinged to have been divided in some illusory way because they're the same thing, right? So pointer, right? Give them a story, right? So hold on to that one knowing that what? It's going to get thrown away when the moment comes and he goes, oh, that is me. Boundary dissolves, right? He says, I do believe you when it comes to the actual finding of this inner self, I find it escapes me. He says, the idea it escapes me, where does it arise? In the mind. The questioner says, yeah. And who knows the mind? The witness of the mind knows the mind. Well, the questioner knows that. He says, did anybody come to you and say, I am the witness of your mind? He says, of course not. He would have just been another idea in the mind. Great. Then who's the witness? Right? Walked him right into that. So you know the witness because you are the witness. You need not see the witness in front of you. Here again, to be is to know. And that's one of the hardest hurdles to go across, right? Because knowledge is always something that I know. Um, it's a possession, right?
Writing that
I'll
one,
tell,
be is to know. That's great.
huh?
Just that I'm writing that one down. To be is to know.
Yep.
That's a good pointer for me.
It really is, right? So, so I remember this is just a not no political commentary here, but some years back I went into a meeting and they asked me for my pronouns. And I'm obviously I grew up in the 60s. I didn't grow up so that was the first time I had heard that and I remember saying I didn't know that we possessed pronouns. And I always kind of think of that as the knower and the known. I don't know why that particular story really drove that one home in that moment because I was like, huh. So how do you own those exactly? Because to me, pronouns were always just kind of indicators, right? I never really thought of them. I remember I said, just to finish a funny story, I said, "Will you guys carry on? Let me jump in a minute." And while everybody else was talking, I went and Googled to figure out what the heck these people were talking about, right? And sure enough, it gave me an explanation. I went, oh, that's what's going on. Okay, I got this. I got this. Because I had no idea what they were asking for when they asked that question. But that's a little like this. You don't possess these things. You are these things, right? All right. He says, so you know the witness because you are the witness. You need not see the witness in front of you. Difference between knowing and being, right? Here again, to be is to know. He says, yes, I see I am the witness, the awareness itself. Here it comes. You ready? But in which way does it profit me? Okay, sure. He says, what a question. What kind of profit do you expect? To know what you are, is that not good enough? What are the uses of self-knowledge? Well, it helps you understand what you are not and keeps you free from false ideas, desires, and actions. He says, I am the witness only. Why do right and wrong matter? Right? He says, what helps you to know yourself is right? What prevents is wrong. To know oneself is bliss, to forget is sorrow. Now, here you can see that he's positing an entirely new definition of good and evil. Right? Because there's no such thing or categories of good and evil here, or right and wrong, as this questioner put it. Right? He says, is the witness, now remember I told you this is really a great passage because it takes you kind of from the beginning through the end. Is the witness consciousness the real self? He says, it is a reflection of the real in the mind. The real is beyond. The witness is the door which you pass beyond. He says, what's the purpose of meditation? He says, seeing the faults is meditation. This must go on all the time, right? So that's one of the things that is kind of interesting is that meditation is a device to display, right, the arising manifestation from a witness standpoint. That's what that device is meant to do. Within awakening happens by itself, right? So when he says this has to go on all the time, he's talking about the awakening space. He says we are told to meditate regularly. And this is why Nisargadatta and Ramesh and a lot of them would say, meditate when meditation arises, but making it a practice creates the support for the illusionary you, because who's doing the meditation? So you have to always watch whenever there's a practice in play that that's going on. He says deliberate daily exercise and discrimination between the true and the false and renunciation of the false is meditation. There are many kinds of meditation to begin with, but they all merge finally into one. Here's a question that often gets asked. Please tell me which road to self-realization is shortest. All right. So now not only do I need the payoff, but I want the one that's short, right? And I remember some years back, we were kind of in the midst of this, metaphysical explosion, and we were seeing all sorts of videos and this and that. And there's this one I really liked. There's this Indian fellow in LA, and he had all this gold on. He was acting like a guru, and he's like, I knocked that hour of meditation out in 10 minutes. Right. So he had found the shortest way. So that's the question here. He said, no way is short or long, but some people are more earnest and some are less. I can tell you about myself. I was a simple man. I trusted my guru. What he told me to do, I did. He told me to concentrate on I am. I did. He told me that I am beyond all perceivables and conceivables. I believed. I gave him my heart and soul, my entire attention, and the whole of my spare time. I had to work to keep my family alive. As a result of faith and earnest application, I released myself, Swarupa, within 3 years. Okay, well, there's a time period. That was his. You may choose any way that suits you. Your earnestness will determine the rate of progress. Right? He says, no hint from me. So you can tell, he's still wanting. He says, establish yourself firmly in the awareness of I am. This is the beginning and also the end of all endeavor. So why is that? Because the establishment in the I am eventually takes, not eventually, but typically pretty quickly, takes one to the place where they know they are simply being lived. And in the moment of knowing that they are simply being lived, then how long it takes, all of the rest of that really is no longer in their hands. And it's that recognition he's talking about it. This is the beginning, but also the end of the endeavor within the witnessing activity that occurs. Yeah. So that's the end of it. And I did the whole one this time. It really is, as I say, it's a beautiful, beautiful piece. Um, Highly recommend it. Um, One of my favorites. Any questions at this point? Comments, questions? No, we're good.
I don't have a question, but I remember a couple months after I moved to Hawaii, if you remember, I said, "Hey, can we speed this up a little bit?"
Yeah, 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 yeah. Ron, that's Ron. Yeah. Well, I probably have told the story. I go to Osho land, I go to the ashram, and I'm there. And now I've never remember I'm fresh off of the boat. I've had a corporate career, and I've started to sit around in metaphysical bookstores and read books. And I'm really interested. I'm doing some things, course on miracles and meditate and this and that. But I'm really raw and really green. And I get there, and a fellow comes out. I remember from his English, and he wearing a black robe, and he had a guitar. I'm like, okay. And he's the guy that's going to interview me to figure out where it is they're going to put me in all of these, kinds of educations and groups and processes. And so he says, well, what are you here for? And I said, well, I don't really know, but I understand you guys are, all trying to seek enlightenment. So I'd like that. Let's say that's what I'm here for, because I don't really know any better. And he goes, well, that's honest. That's nice. And he goes, so tell me how it is that you intend to do it. And I remember as fast as I go, it's going to happen like everything else. I said, you're going to tell me what it takes to get enlightenment, right? I'm going to put them on a list, and I'm going to knock those bad boys out one after the other. And when I'm done, I'm enlightened, right? Isn't that how this? And I remember, I don't know whether he wanted to laugh or cry. I'm not entirely sure, right? But he was stunned, right? Because it was so obviously out. I mean, this is how everything works, right? So this is obviously going to work the same way from my perspective. You guys just need to give me the material to put in the machine and let the machine do its work. Well, you can imagine, they put me in a 21-day process primal in silence. And in my life, I had never been in silence, just so everybody knows. So these folks wanted to get rid of me. They didn't want me coming in and asking when my class. I'd come in for several days, and they kept telling me you need to arrive, and I kept telling them, no, honest, I'm here, because I didn't know what they were talking about. So anyway, that was my Ron version of when are we going to get? Let's get to it. Like if we've got something to do, let's start now. So a lot of us are built that way. So I wanted to just kind of bring this piece in. You saw it this week. If you saw it, I'm going to go through it. It's called Hammer Blows. It's one of my favorite pieces. That's Nisargadatta's term. So he often referred to his teaching as hammer blows. And on the surface, this is usually interpreted as repetition. The same pointers delivered again and again until the mind finally gives way. And there's truth in that. Um, the mind is rarely in the same receptive condition twice. It drifts, it resists, it reasserts itself as the center of experience. So the hammer blow interrupts that drift. It snaps the attention out of its habitual identification with the movement of duality. But if we stop there, we miss something essential, right? Because what appears as repetition is not repetition at all. Two worlds, there are, in a sense, two worlds of understanding. One is knowledge, the other is wisdom. They are often confused because they use the same language, but they operate in entirely different domains. Knowledge is accumulation. It's made of concepts, definition, frameworks, and data points. The mind is a gatekeeper, is its gatekeeper. It stores, organizes, retrieves, and compares. Now we have AI, so it's even worse. It functions like a librarian. Information comes in, it's cataloged, it can be accessed, and when needed, in this world, repetition makes perfect sense. If something's forgotten, it's reintroduced. If something is unclear, it's explained again. The hammer blow here is simply a reinforcement, a reminder, a correction, a refinement of understanding. All right. Below it. And once the mind grasps, it moves on. But wisdom does not function this way. So the reason I bring that up is to remember that the mind is active and it'll want to move on to the next thing. Right? So the Satguru is the one that looks for the deeper meaning, the deeper wisdom in the hammer blows, right? He's the field of wisdom. Wisdom has no location. It's not stored. It is not accumulated. It cannot be retrieved. It is closer to what you are than to what you know. If knowledge lives in the mind, wisdom lives in the being. And being has no center, no container, no boundary from which it operates. This is why the mind cannot manage wisdom. It can speak about it, it can point towards it, but it cannot hold it. The movement of the pointer. When a pointer is heard in the realm of knowledge, it is interpreted. That's what the mind does. When a pointer is heard in the realm of wisdom, it is absorbed. Big difference. But absorbed is not quite right. It is more like it lands, right? And where it lands is not fixed. Each time a pointer appears, it enters a different terrain. The surface may be the same, the words may be identical, but the depth at which it strikes is entirely new. Right? So get used to that. Get used to hearing the same thing over and over again and not having the mind run because I already know that. I remember we did our very first satsang, and a woman who lives here nearby, she wrote a note. In fact, it was in our little thing. And she says, I listened to it. Thank you. She says, but I already know this. And I had to chuckle because you know that the mind, right? The words that come out of my mouth, the words that come out of any of your mouth, well, it's the same, right? You can take all of the words out of this, and they're the same words that come, in one way, shape, or form, depending on how they're organized, written, or the rest of it. Same thing. So something else has to be going on, right? The illusion of repetition. Here you go. This is where the misunderstanding arises. The seeker hears the same statement, you are not the body. There is no doer. Stay with the sense of I am. And the mind says, I've heard this before. Right? The statement is true, but only in the world of knowledge. In the world of wisdom, it is never the same because the one hearing it is not the same. Not as an entity evolving, but as conditioning loosening. Right? In dissolution. As identification thins, the same pointer penetrates deeper. That kind of makes sense, doesn't it? As the boundaries dissolve, the pointers penetrate deeper. Once was heard conceptually is now felt. What was once understood intellectually is now intuited. What was once resisted is now allowed. There is no repetition, only deepening. Each hammer blow does not reinforce a structure, it breaks one, but not all at once, layer by layer, assumption by assumption, identification by identification. Each time something gives way, a new depth is revealed. The next blow does not land where the previous one did. It lands deeper and deeper still until even the sense of depth disappears. There is another subtlety here. When a pointer arises from wisdom, it must pass through the mind to be expressed. And in this translation, something is lost. Right? The living immediacy becomes language. The boundless becomes structured. The formless becomes words. This is why teachings can feel repetitive, because language is limited. The same words are used again and again, but what they carry is not the same. The pointer is alive. The words are not. So earlier, remember we talked about how Maharaj planted a living understanding that was later going to be thrown away. But what's the part he's counting on? Because in a story, there's two pieces, the linguistic piece and the being piece. And remember, we talked about as a child how you would, create these forts and your stories were real, right? Because as a child, the immediacy is just such a huge quantity and the language is something really new. So there's just a little of it. And pretty soon we create the balance where there's lots and lots and lots of language and not so much immediacy, right? So what a living understanding or that story seeks to do is move the quantity of being. It wants to increase it to where it's all being, right? That's what it's attempting to do, right? So the pointer is alive and the words are not. Recognize that. The mind thrives on novelty, new concepts, new frameworks, new insights. It wants movement in a world of knowledge. So when it hears the same pointer repeatedly, it becomes restless. I already know this. And in that moment, it closes. But what it calls boredom is often the threshold. When you're bored, stop, right? The place where knowledge has reached its limit and wisdom is awaiting. Right. I know I go in sometimes if you think about this boredom, because someone will say, well, what did you do? And of course, in my world, it's pretty much the same, the same thing. And I remember there's a young lady, I know she's in her early 20s, and one day she says, you're really boring. And it made me laugh because she's right. To the mind, I'm incredibly boring. I get up, I go get my coffee. I mean, look at this is the highlight of my week, right? Most folks probably would look at this and go, really? There you go. He says, hammer blows are not meant to convince the mind. They're meant to exhaust it, to bring it to a point where it can no longer sustain its position as the knower, where its frameworks no longer provide traction, where its certainty collapses. And in that collapse, something else becomes apparent, not something new, something that was never absent. So when a repetition feels familiar, when it sounds like the thousandth repetition, do not listen to the words. Feel where it lands, what moves, what resists, what opens. There's always something, subtle perhaps, but unmistakable if attended to. Follow that, not the statement. The movement it creates, write it down, not conceptually, but experientially. Let it take you to its depth, because that depth was not available before. Eventually, even this process comes to an end. Now, remember, he talked about how you go to the I am, and then the I am opens up for that which lives behind it. That's how he phrased it, and I am that. So now even this process comes to an end because there is nothing left for it to strike. When dissolution is occurring, what happens when all is dissolved? Well, there's nowhere for anything to land any longer. Right? He says, no assumption to dismantle, no entity to receive. At that point, the hammer is unnecessary, not discarded, simply irrelevant because nothing stands to be struck. And then the words may still come, same words, same pointers, but they no longer function as blows. They are simply expressions. The movements within us, what is? No longer directed, no longer received, just happening. So when it all sounds the same, good. That means the mind has reached its limit. Now listen differently. Not for new information, but for the depth at which the blow lands. And when you feel it, don't explain it, don't store it, don't compare it. Let it take you down. Because each blow is not repeating itself, it's revealing a new depth that did not exist for you before. And at the bottom of that descent, there is nothing to be found. Right? So there's my little add-on to what we read today. All right. Any comments at this point? Comments, input? No?
Well, I know it said do not absorb it, do not hold
Yep.
on to it.
Yep.
All of that. Is it in writing somewhere? Because I'd love to see it again later. There's
Oh
another
yes,
hammer
no.
blow.
So this gets posted on the page. I the last 5 or 6 weeks I've been doing the chapter, and then what I do is I've been writing a piece as an add-on, so that
Oh, fantastic.
just to give it a little bit more of a contemporary style, if you will. So I'm connecting the
Yeah.
two.
Thank you.
And anytime anybody wants them, and I can send them all to you at any time, just send me an email. I have Word docs. I send a Word doc over to Michael. He posts it on the page, so I can send you Word if you want an actual Word doc. So if you read it, and I don't know if you notice or not, for those of you who have been here the last like 6 weeks, um, it gets posted on the page and you read it, right? And then it gets presented in satsang, and start to notice the difference between those two experiences, right? Anything that enters into the satsang space, it gets completely developed in the way that it wants to develop within the space. That's just how that is. So, as brilliant as it might look when you read it, take a gander at what's happening when it's actually introduced into the space. And anyone I think could read it. It's that there's something about the holding of it within satsang itself. It's not my holding, it's not your holding, it is the holding. And that holding in terms of the delivery makes a huge difference. And so that's why I started to push these in. So those are the two pieces that have been happening, um, the last ones. The other thing that you might have noticed is that I've been bouncing around a little. I've done some Ramesh, and I've done some, I'm just kind of picking topics now that I think or that just kind of suggest themselves. You're based on whatever. I watch the comments on the pages and a few things, and for some reason something will pop, and then I'll develop it out of that. Yeah, but I have those. Anything that you hear in here, you can get from me, because along with that, I always have the chapter. I always know which week it was presented and what chapter was, so I can go, if you want the chapter that goes with it, here's the piece here's the part that goes with it.
Great. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. Well, thank you all. I don't know if you notice, it's actually special to do this right now, because it just feels like everything's kind of helter-skelter in our world right now. I don't know why. So when that's going on, then this particular experience is now living in a certain contrast. And so it feels so precious. So I'm really glad you all came, and I'm hoping that I'm a little early today, but I'm hoping that it was enough.
It was enough, and the silence. You can just feel the silence. It's very rich.
Yeah, that's what I say. So, in the helter skelter of today's world being particularly helter skelter, it's a rich contrast. It's a beautiful thing. All right, everyone. So till next week. Wish you all a wonderful week. Have a great week, and we will we'll do this again next week.
Right. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Much love.
Thanks, Alan. Have a great night, y'all.